The first blow split the air with a sharp, brutal crack. Steel rang against stone as the archbishop staggered under the force. The four knights, the king's own men, stormed through England's holiest place, as if nothing were amiss. The monks' chants of vespers faded into panic and disbelief as the knights committed an act that would stain history. And then, silence, as crimson spread slowly across the cold floor of Canterbury Cathedral. Hello, and welcome to Impactful Moments, where we explore some of the most, you guessed it, impactful moments in human history. In this video, we'll follow the story of Henry II, his rise from chaos, his forging of an empire, and the dramatic confrontation at Canterbury that defined his legacy. Across the ancient world, politics and religion were indivisible. Pharaohs ruled as gods, Roman emperors served as Pontifex Maximus, and empires were their gods' earthly domains. But in medieval Europe, this changed. The fall of Rome created a vacuum, which was filled by two separate powers: secular rulers who controlled politics, land, and armies, and the Catholic Church, a spiritual authority that transcended borders. This meant two parallel authorities, both claiming the loyalty of the same people. Initially, kings seemed to hold the upper hand, with figures like Charlemagne providing the muscle in exchange for the church's blessing. But by the 11th century, the church began to push back. Papal reforms under Gregory VII sparked a continent-wide power tug-of-war, epitomized by the investiture controversy, a bitter conflict over who had the right to appoint powerful bishops, men with both secular and ecclesiastical authority. England had remained at arm's length from these continental disputes, but not for long. Though Christianized centuries earlier and often charting its own course, England's crown and church would eventually collide in spectacular fashion. This isn't to say that English politics was by any means clean. When William, Duke of Normandy, now known as the Conqueror, seized the English throne at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, a new English era had begun, but this Norman transition was far from smooth. William needed to crush uprisings with brutal force, and his death led to bitter succession disputes. Following William the Conqueror's death, the throne eventually went to Henry I. However, the unexpected death of his only legitimate son, William Adelin, in the White Ship disaster in 1120 shattered the succession. With no surviving sons, Henry I named his daughter Matilda as his heir, a bold move in a male-dominated age. Her son, Henry Plantagenet, would later inherit her claim. However, when Henry I died in 1135, his nephew, Stephen of Blois, seized the throne, triggering a devastating 20-year civil war known simply as the Anarchy, when law and order in England all but collapsed. Despite this chaos, the young Henry Plantagenet grew into an extraordinarily powerful ruler. In just his late teens, he inherited vast continental lands, including the Duchy of Normandy and the counties of Anjou, Maine, and Touraine from his father, Geoffrey Plantagenet, all by 1151. Henry, now Europe's most eligible bachelor, married Eleanor of Aquitaine, 11 years his senior, the following year, cementing his status. Eleanor's previous marriage to the French king, Louis VII, had been annulled when she couldn't produce a male heir, and her marriage to Henry 8 weeks later brought with her the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine. By the age of just 20, Henry commanded more territory in modern France than the French king himself. And with power came ambition. In 1153, Henry led his own forces to England to confront King Stephen. However, the sudden death of Stephen's eldest son, Eustace, the main impediment to peace, led to the Treaty of Wallingford, which granted Stephen the crown for life, but named Henry as his successor. Later that year, Stephen was dead. And now, at just 21, the ambitious Henry II ruled much of France and all of England. Once crowned, he moved swiftly to undo the chaos left in the anarchy's wake, restoring royal authority, reforming the kingdom's finances, and laying the groundwork for a unified legal system that would outlast even his empire. Yet, for all of Henry's ambition and territorial might, his most enduring legacy would come not from conquest, but from friendship, and ultimately betrayal. Thomas Becket, born around 1120 to a prosperous Norman merchant, had risen through the ranks by his intellect and drive. Educated in Paris, he entered the service of Archbishop Theobald of Canterbury, where his sharp mind and loyalty caught the attention of the young king. Henry saw in Becket a kindred spirit, ambitious, pragmatic, and capable, and soon made him Chancellor of England, one of the most powerful offices in the realm. When Archbishop Theobald died in 1161, Henry saw an opportunity to have his trusted ally elevated to the highest ecclesiastical seat in the land. Despite resistance from the Canterbury monks, and even Becket himself, Becket was appointed archbishop in 1162, a move Henry believed would bring church and crown into perfect alignment under his will. He could not have been more mistaken. The friendship faced its first test when Henry insisted that clergy accused of secular crimes must be tried in royal courts, while Becket defended the church's privilege to judge its own. In 1164, Henry formalized his position in the Constitutions of Clarendon, a set of laws asserting royal supremacy over the church in judicial matters, to which Becket reluctantly agreed. Yet almost immediately he recanted, declaring the articles an assault on the church. Furious, Henry accused Becket of financial misconduct during his years as chancellor. Becket fled England, seeking refuge in France under King Louis VII, where he would spend 6 years in exile as his relationship with Henry continued to crumble. In Becket's absence, Henry focused on securing his dynasty. He planned to have his eldest son Henry the Younger crowned as King of England during his own lifetime by the Archbishop of York, ensuring continuity and preventing another civil war. However, traditionally only the Archbishop of Canterbury could perform the coronation, and that archbishop was in exile, and saw this coronation as a direct affront to his authority. In 1170, in Fretival, under papal pressure, Henry and Becket reached a fragile truce, and Becket returned to England to great public acclaim. Almost immediately, however, Becket began excommunicating the bishops, including Roger de Pont-l'Evêque, Archbishop of York, who had supported Henry's son's coronation, an excommunication that blatantly undermined Henry's authority. When news reached Henry, he is said to have muttered, perhaps to himself, perhaps to anyone in earshot, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" Words that did not go unheard. On December 29th, 1170, 4 knights, Reginald Fitzurse, William de Tracy, Hugh de Morville, and Richard le Breton, took the king's frustrated words as a command. They rode to Canterbury, entered the cathedral during evening prayers, and demanded that Becket submit to the king's will. When he refused, the knights, in England's holiest sanctuary, before the altar itself, murdered Thomas Becket. A king's friend turned rival, murdered in a cathedral by men acting in supposed service to the crown. While the king vehemently denied giving the orders, few believed him entirely clean. His own family even appealed to the Pope for justice, and Henry faced not just public outrage, but familial and divine condemnation. The rest of Henry's reign was consumed by turmoil, rebellions, betrayals, and loss, which many contemporaries saw as divine punishment for Becket's martyrdom. Though Henry had crowned his eldest son, Henry the Younger, as co-king, the gesture was purely ceremonial. The young Henry held no real power, and the frustration festered. In 1173, he joined his brothers Richard and Geoffrey in open revolt against their father. With the encouragement of their mother, Henry's estranged wife Eleanor of Aquitaine, and the backing of the French king, Henry's sons turned their swords against their father. Only John, Henry's youngest, backed the king. Even Scotland rose in the north, and Henry, perhaps crediting divine intervention, sought penance, walking barefoot and accepting lashes from the bishops at Becket's tomb, before ultimately crushing the rebellion. Though he triumphed militarily, the personal cost was immense. His family relations lay in ruins, and over the following years he would bury 2 of his sons, Henry the Younger in 1183 and Geoffrey in 1186. The final blow came when Henry refused to name Richard his heir. Richard turned to Philip II of France and attacked following the failed negotiations, even recruiting John to turn against his father. Broken, exhausted, and betrayed, Henry surrendered in 1189. When he learned that John, his favorite, had joined the enemy, he is said to have whispered, "Now let all things go as they will. I care no more for myself nor for the world." On July 6th, 1189, Henry II, the architect of an empire, the restorer of order, and the man who once ruled both England and half of France, died at Chinon Castle in Anjou, defeated by his own blood. Enjoying so far? Give us a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know and keeps this kind of content coming. Henry's rule transformed the English and broader Angevin Empire. The chaos of the anarchy had given way to a centralized monarchy whose authority and codified laws reached into every shire and manor. Royal justice, royal taxation, and royal officials replaced the loose feudal patchwork that had once defined the realm. For the first time in a generation, the central crown, not the nobles, stood as the defining power of the land. In the church, the martyrdom of Thomas Becket elevated Canterbury into one of Christendom's holiest sites, but it also constrained royal power. Future kings would rule with the knowledge that the church and public opinion could stand against them. Henry's struggle with Becket had redrawn the balance between the church and state, settling boundaries that even England's mightiest rulers could not cross without consequence, and inspiring greater scrutiny of the monarchy's divine right to rule. More on that in just a moment. The death of Henry's three sons, William, who died in infancy, Henry the Younger, and Geoffrey, left the succession first to Richard the Lionheart, one of England's most ambitious and militaristic kings, and later to John, whose reign proved disastrous. Richard ruled largely abroad, waging war and crusading, leaving England governed by ministers. John, by contrast, ruled directly and poorly, alienating nobles, clergy, and subjects alike. His failures, combined with the lasting royal constraints born from Becket's martyrdom, ultimately forced him to accept the Magna Carta in 1215, a monumental declaration that even a king was subject to the law. Among England's most influential monarchs, few reshaped the kingdom as profoundly as Henry II. Alfred the Great may have saved English society, and William the Conqueror forged the Norman realm that followed, but it was Henry who transformed their legacies into a single enduring nation. He consolidated the scattered fiefdoms, divided loyalties, and regional laws into a cohesive system of power and order. Under his reign, England evolved into a realm governed not by feudal whim, but through consistency and law. Nowhere was that transformation more visible than in his legal reforms. By weaving together Anglo-Saxon traditions and Norman innovations, Henry created a unified legal framework that would become known as common law. His system of itinerant royal judges, standardized writs, trial by jury, and recorded proceedings established the idea that law should outlast the ruler who enforces it. The notion that justice is bound to principle, not personality, would shape Parliament, inspire constitutional government, and ultimately influence the very foundations of modern democracies, including the United States Constitution. Yet, as noted, Henry's reign was rife with controversy. His conflict with Thomas Becket exposed the timeless church-state struggle, a clash that had haunted Europe for generations. In their feud, friendships and loyalty gave way to conviction and power, culminating in one of the most dramatic confrontations between spiritual and royal authority in medieval history. England may have recovered quickly, but the Becket affair revealed a foundational divide that would not stay buried. The questions of ultimate allegiance, to God or to the king, would resurface again and again. And in time, another Henry, the Eighth, would face it with consequences that forever changed the Christian world. You'll have to wait for that video. When history remembers England's monarchs, Henry II's name stands on the shortlist of those who defined the nation's character. He restored order to a fractured realm, built legal and administrative systems that gave England its identity, and founded the Plantagenet line, the longest royal dynasty in English history. His reign laid the groundwork for the very culture and institutions that would come to define England itself, controversy or not. I hope you enjoyed this video and found this period in history both informative and enlightening. Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope you can join us for another video. Thanks for watching.